Hello everyone, my name is Wonjoon Shim. I'm working at Korea Institute of Ocean Science Technology as a principal research scientist. Today I'm going to talk about why should we consider microplastic as emerging contaminant of concerns. For the past 65 years, a human being produced 8.3 billion of plastics. When we consider it 100%, 30% of them are in use stocks currently. Only 8% was recycled. Approximately 10% was incinerated. The total 59% of the total production and or 79% of plastic waste was discarded. It means tremendous amount of microplastics are on the earth. Plastic was invented in the late 19th centuries, but mass production was occurred from 1950s. The plastic production was sharply increased since then. You can see on the slide, total production in the world increased 20 times when you compared from 1964 to 2014. When you integrated the productions, 50% of the total production accumulated only less than 13 years. In 2011, 280 billion tons produced in the world. Almost the same amount of the plastics is produced as waste. Among them, 8 million tons of plastics enter into ocean. Human beings landed around 6.5 million tons of tuna every year, and then we input 8 billion tons of plastics into the ocean. We were taught that from elementary school. It takes tens of hundreds of years to degrade plastics in the natural environment. Yes, it's true for biodegradation. But when you consider part oxidation by the ultraviolet light in the sunlight, it's another story. You can see on the slide, when plastic's surface is exposed to ultraviolet light, it makes cracks on the surface, and finally, the fragment small tiny particles on the surface. But you cannot see with your naked eyes. The microscopic the aid is required to see these tiny particles. So we call these tiny plastic particles microplastic. For practical reason, microplastic size ranges in between 1 micrometer to 5 millimeter. Because the pre-production resin pellet of each size in the range of 1 to 5 millimeter needs to be included in the microplastic the size range. Below 1 micrometer we call nanoplastics. Among them, the intentionally manufactured plastic in that small size we call primary microplastics. And secondary microplastic means the plastic particles fragmented from the product when we use them or when it's discussed as plastic litters in the environment. On the slide, that these photos show that the microplastics, the left one is pre-production resin pellet, right one is polyethylene particles amended in cosmetics. Now it's banned in Korea from 2017. These photos show the secondary microplastic collected in environment. The photos in these slides were microplastics detected in real samples. Creek waters, the effluent from the wastewater treatment plants, and air we are breathing every day, and seawater samples and sediment and various marine biota. You can see this tiny particle with the microscope. There are very different size and polymers and shapes. we conducted the laboratory experiment how expanded polystyrene, how quickly expanded polystyrene degraded when it's exposed to sunlight. It's very important for the policymakers because how quickly we remove these plastic litters from the environment. You can see on the slide, when EPS cubes were exposed to sunlight up to 2 years, the surface color changed from white to yellow. The lower part, you can see that the crack on the surface and the micro, even nanoplastics fragmented by weathering. This graph looks very complicated, but I explain very simply. The x-axis means exposure time to the UV light. The y-axis is the fragmented nano and microplastics by the natural weathering. It means that exposure time increased, produce more nano and microplastics. When I'd like to simply convert it to the simple calculation, when very common the EPS, the insulating box was exposed to in the environment, only the lead surface exposed to the environment for a year, it produced 301 billion microplastic and nanoplastic particles. Why microplastic can be such an environmental issue nowadays? It changed the paradigm of plastic pollution in the marine environment. For example, the expanded polystyrene we call EPS, of which size is from mega, looks like hippo, to nano size as a coronavirus. It'll change numbers. Microplastic numbers exponentially increase, and the target organism will be increased. For example, only vinyl bag might be ingested by sea turtle and seabird and marine mammals, but these tiny particles can be ingested every living beings in the environment, even including human beings. And we generally say that the smaller the more toxic, and the most important part is very difficult to detect. For example, the animal died, we cannot understand why it died from microplastic. Finally, cleanup is almost impossible. When microplastic, the cause of problem, we need to remove them from the environment with some effort. But these tiny particles, you cannot remove from the environment. That's why we need the precautionary approach to solve this problem. As the macroplastic debris, microplastic also can be transported long range with wind and current. Thus, we call this is transboundary or transplanetary pollution. This animation shows that the microplastic discharged from 5 major rivers in Korea finally reached to Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we call GPGP, within a couple of years. It means the macroplastic problems cannot be solved by one country. That's why we need international cooperation to tackle these problems. This list names where microplastic contamination has been reported so far. From coastal environment to deep sea floor and various organisms, even terrestrial and freshwater environment, including the alpine lake in the high mountains, and atmospheric environment, including both indoor and outdoor airs, and foodstuffs. It is now the ubiquitous pollutant, our planet. There is no way to avoid exposure, including human beings. The model prediction produced this worldwide microplastic distribution map. As you can see, the Mediterranean and Asia marginal sea are hotspots for microplastic pollution, along with high population density in Asian region and fast-growing economy in this region, and finally, relatively poor plastic waste management systems. Historical trend is very, very important to manage any kind of environmental pollution. Some pollution may be in increasing or steady state or decreasing trend. So they give very different options to take to tackle that problems. But there is a very limited information about the historical trend of microplastic. As limited archival samples to look at. But there are very limited studies, but two studies obviously show that the microplastic pollution in our marine environment is increasing trend. The first one is North Atlantic Ocean, the CPL entanglement study. You can see that the plastic debris in the front of the continuous plankton recorder, they show that increasing trend. Second one is right side is the age-dated sediment core was analyzed for microplastics. Age-dated means we can see that the year of that the sediment on each layer. The right lower part of the graph to show that solid line show the sediment plastic deposition rate. The open circle with the dotted line is world plastic production. You can see that two lines perfectly match. It means if plastic production increase in future, the plastic pollution in our environment increase together. Actually, it was estimated with that prediction model. Microplastic abundance in the North Pacific will increase 4 times 46 years later in 2066. Another study from European scientists showed that seawater, sediment, and the beach sample will, the microplastic abundance in the seawater, sediment, and beach will increase up to 50 times in 2100, 80 years later. You may imagine that it's very long after, but not. You should consider year of the planet. The age of our planet, the Earth is around 4.6 billion. So 80 years means very, very, very short term. The people who are working at the plastic waste management every time say that plastic waste is inert solid waste. It partly is true, but not. The hydrophobic nature of plastic, because it's made of petroleum, so it can accumulate the persistent organic pollutants in the surrounding environment up to 1 million times compared to that in the water concentration. And we add various kinds of additive chemicals to enhance performance of plastic products or to shape them. For example, the polyvinyl chloride, we call the PVC, contain up to 60% of plasticizer, phthalate. The phthalate is very well-known endocrine disrupting chemicals. So, the movement of plastic in the environment means not only movement of nuisance garbage, it transports the toxic chemicals together inside of them. To prove there is the additive chemicals in the marine plastic litters, we collected 30 very common types of plastic waste on our beach. We ground them and we conducted a non-target screening analysis. It means we do not target certain chemicals. We try to analyze any chemicals in the plastic litter. So we detected over 200 chemicals from those marine litters. The antioxidant, plasticizer, UV stabilizer, and flame retardant, all the additive chemicals, the ranked in a top position. Their concentration is much higher than any absorbed chemicals. So that microplastic may cause two adverse biological effects upon ingestion by any organism. Firstly, a physical impact by ingestion of a tiny particle. And second one is the chemical impact of the leaching of associated chemicals in the body of that animals, which ingest the plastic product. There is a concern about biomagnification of microplastics through marine food webs. It was partly proved that they can be transferred through trophic level in the laboratory with controlled condition, but there is no evidence yet in the real environment. When I attended international workshop almost 8 years ago, at the time the United Nations, the agency attended the meeting as an observer. Most of them asked the scientists on the table how serious of the microplastic pollution at the moment, and we need to take action or not. They're the priority questions. So they wanted the scientists to answer the question. So that's why in Korea we try to conduct a nationwide project to conduct the ecological risk assessment of marine microplastic in Korean waters for the past 6 years. This one graph is our final product. It's a little complicated, but I try to explain the simply. The gray color is current microplastic abundance level in Korean coastal waters and far offshore waters. Far offshore means continental shelf and deep sea areas in Korea. This is current level. And I already mentioned that the microplastic pollution will increase in the future. So we simply applied that value in our prediction. So our coastal and far offshore water concentration will increase 4 times in 2066, and it may increase 50 times in 2100, 80 years later. So I drew the graph in cumulative probability. So y-axis is in a percentage, x-axis is the concentration level in log scale. Another value is we call predicted no effect concentration. It means over this value may cause adverse biological effect. Below this level is safe. How we can derive this value? There is a protocol in the scientific community. This value comes from laboratory bioassays covering many different type of organisms, many different taxa. So we try to collect all the toxicity data in the literature and also including the bioassay data. So we derived this PNEC value 12 particles per liter. So I put that in a red line. So very simply I can explain. Left side of this line means no risk. right side of this value means there is risk. So you can say that, fortunately, the current level in Korean marine environments are below this value. The highest point very close to the finish value, but lower than that. But in 2066, 46 years later, 1% of offshore water and 5% of the Korean coastal water may increase this value. In 2100, 22% of offshore water and 64% of coastal water will exceed this value. It means the future generation will experience that impact of microplastic in real marine environment in Korea. As I mentioned earlier, we human beings can be exposed to microplastics through inhalation of contaminated air and consumption of contaminated water and food. I say it is inconvenient truth, and there is no way to avoid exposure. Why? It's ubiquitous in our environment. It's very hard to find non-contaminated air, water, and food. This photo shows the microplastic detected in commercial bivalve samples. Bivalve means, clams and mussels and oysters. The purchased from market in Korea. The detection frequency is over 95%. The photos of the bottom show that microplastic particles were detected from bottled water sold in the market. The Canadian scientists very recently reported a paper, North American people exposed to microplastic in the odor of air, seafood, bottled water, sugar, table water, alcohol, salt, honey. The seafood ranked the second part, and salt also one of exposure route. And some Austrian scientists found that microplastic were detected all the volunteers from 8 different countries. They collected human stools, and all the human stools include a microplastic particle. You can see that various polymers with a different composition level. It means it is solid evidence that we consume microplastics. So any plastic we use or discard it to the environment can ultimately fragment it to small microplastics and nanoplastics by the weathering. And these tiny particles can be ingested by various aquatic organisms, including commercial species. Finally, they reach it to our dinner plate. So I say we eat what we throw away in the environment. Based on the best available data, we are supposed to have a 5 grams of credit card per week and the plastic toothbrush per month. Some people think that, this is not a big deal. Just 5 grams per week is acceptable, maybe. But in 2100, as I mentioned, the micropollution level will increase up to 50 times. It means your grandchildren might eat 50 credit cards per week or 2,500 credit cards per year. This assumption also based on that if we keep current increased rate of plastic pollution and current plastic waste management system. This is a take-home message from my presentation today. Microplastics are ubiquitous in world ocean and Asian marginal seas hotspots, including Korea and Indonesia. Marine microplastic shows apparently increasing historical trend, and many scientists predicted that pollution level will increase in our future. Thirdly, tremendous amount of secondary microplastics and nanoplastic has been produced by natural weathering, but is not properly quantified yet. So we don't know how much amount of and how many different types of microplastic produced every minute in our environment. It's very hardly to quantify an exact amount. Finally, precautious approach is highly required to reduce environmental plastic pollution for future generation. This study was partly supported by funding of Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, Republic of Korea. Thank you for listening.